Boy, I love Lindsay singing. Today I'm going to be reading from Matthew chapter 21. Or I'm sorry, Luke. I said the same thing. Luke chapter 20. See, I'm thinking about Matthew 24 being parallel to verse chapter 21 of Luke. But anyway, then we will be reading verses 5 through 19 in Luke 21, and also Luke chapter 22, verses 3 through 6. If you have your Bibles, just follow along with me, okay? Some of his disciples were remarking about how the temple was adorned with beautiful stones and gifts dedicated to God. But Jesus said, "As for what you see here, the time will come when not one stone will be left on another. Every one of them will be thrown down." "Teacher," they asked, "when will all these things happen? And what will be the sign that they are about to take place, rather?" He replied, "Watch out that you are not deceived. For many will come in my name, claiming, 'I am he,' and the time is near. Do not follow them. When you hear of wars and revolutions, do not be frightened. These things must happen first, but the end will not come right away." Then he said to them, "Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be great earthquakes, famines, and pestilences in various places, and fearful events and great signs from heaven. But before all this, they will lay hands on you and persecute you. They will deliver you to synagogues and prisons, and you will be brought before the kings and governors, and all on account of my name. This will result in your being witnesses to them. But make up your mind not to worry beforehand how you will defend yourselves. For I will give you words and wisdom that none of your adversaries will be able to resist or contradict. You will be betrayed even by parents, brothers, relatives, and friends, and they will put some of you to death. All men will hate you because of me, but not a hair of your head will perish. By standing firm, you will gain life." Then reading from chapter 22, verses 3 through 6. Then Satan entered Judas, called Iscariot, one of the 12. And Judas went to the chief priests and the officers of the temple guard and discussed with them how he might betray Jesus. They were delighted and agreed to give him money. He consented and watched for an opportunity to hand Jesus over to them when no crowd was present. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Thanks be to God.
Thank you, Deacon. I don't know how you view things, and I'm not sure how you approach challenges or hardships that you face in your life. I'm not sure what kind of patience you have with things that come your way, or certain hindrances that may get in your way. For our household, we try to look at struggles and hardships as opportunities. We know that things happen to us, we have health issues, things happen, but we try to find opportunities in everything. Maybe there's an opportunity to learn something, or perhaps even when we fail, what can we do differently the next time? And there's an opportunity to learn something, or to grow, or to stretch, or to do something else. Sometimes we're grouchy, at least I am sometimes, and I don't want to see any opportunities at all. I just want to go, hide under the covers, and escape from life, and just throw my hands in resignation, and to just do away with everything so that I can just focus on myself and have a pity party. Rather than seeing an opportunity, just let those challenges just take me over. One time I was at a grocery store with Christina, and we were going back and forth at the register, and I must have done something like this, where we were going back and forth, I just went, nah. Anyway, people who were across the grocery store, friends of ours, were still shopping, and they saw me go, nah, and laughed about it, and said, "What were you guys fighting about?" And I said, "Oh, we weren't fighting. We were just, going back and forth," and I just waved Christina on just to move along. They said, "Oh, you look like you were fighting." And I said, No, we weren't fighting." And the lesson I learned in that time was that sometimes when you do things, it can come off as real grouchy, and you have to be really careful. When you face challenges in life, we have to be careful, how we perceive them, how we react to things. And though sometimes even death may occur or hardship may occur, we can see that there are opportunities. Today we join Jesus walking through the temple courts with his disciples. They're admiring the beautiful temple around them. It is a beautiful building, one of the wonders of the world, built by Herod the Great a few decades earlier. Bricks upon bricks, giant bricks, about the size of this table, stacked upon each other, drawing eyes to heaven as Jews would have gathered in that place during this week of Passover in our lesson today, in order to come together as God's people to proclaim that so long ago God saved Israel from Egypt. Many in town would have wondered if God was going to finally raise up his people yet again in order to overthrow the Romans who were occupying Israel at the time of Jesus. And here Jesus comes riding in on a donkey, claiming that he is the Messiah. His disciples waved palm branches the Sunday before, welcoming him, declaring that he is the Son of David, the King, and the coming Messiah. So certainly the expectation was that perhaps Jesus, who walked on water, raised Lazarus from the dead, healed those who were sick, brought miracles and sight to the blind, will certainly raise an army in order to overthrow Rome once and for all, and tensions were high. It was not uncommon for insurrections and revolutions to happen during Passover week when you had that kind of number of Israelites coming together to declare and to sing the Passover of the Lord. So many times there were outbreaks of revolutions, and usually the Romans would double up on their garrisons and soldiers and standing army during the time of Passover in order to keep the mobs at bay. So when they were walking through the temple and they were admiring the beautiful work around them, we can take pause and ask what they thought when Jesus says, "You see this beautiful temple? Not one stone will be laid upon the other. It'll all come falling down." And I'm sure that they thought certainly that God would come back to raise a new temple, not knowing that in just 40 years after Jesus' death, the Romans would come in and blow up the temple because of a revolt that the Israelites will commit after Jesus dies, around 70 AD. But they are curious, and so they say, "Jesus, when will these things happen?" He says, well, when you see famines and pestilence, when you see nations rise against nations and kingdoms rise against kingdoms, and there are all these things happening, when you see earthquakes, and when they bring you before the authorities and drag you into the synagogue, when you're called to account, then you'll know these things are near. Now, I kind of wonder, if I was walking with Jesus, what would I think? And I think the first thing I would say is, but Jesus, nations have been at war since almost the beginning of time. Going all the way back to Cain and Abel, people have been fighting one another. And as for earthquakes, Israel is on a fault line, so there have been many earthquakes, and famine happens almost every other year. We don't have to look far for plagues. We have entire leper colonies. And certainly, if they arrest us, we'll try to figure something out. But it's those things that Jesus places them in and tells them that these are the signs that the kingdom is yet to come and is coming, is near. But during those things, rather than focusing on the wars and the toppling of empires and the famines and earthquakes, Jesus gives 3 admonishments, 3 words of encouragement that really they need to focus on. One of those comes in verse 8 when he says, "Beware that you are not led astray." Do not be led astray. And the truth of the matter is, there are wars, there are famines, there are earthquakes, there are all these things that happen around us. But no matter what happens, do not take your eyes off of God. Do not be led astray. Beware that you are not led astray by those who are false teachers, by those who may have gimmicks, by those who want to take matters into their own hands and perhaps teach you a different way than I am showing you. Do not be led astray. In verse 8, he gives another admonishment, or verse 9, when he says, "Do not be afraid." I would think that 9 times out of 10, when we get into hot water, when we try to take matters into our own hands, and we just bring confusion or just make everything muddy or make a mess of ourselves. And when we try to take matters into our own hands in order to get our way or push our agenda, 9 times out of 10, it's because we're afraid. Usually when we're going through some kind of conflict in church, or perhaps some kind of interpersonal disagreement, or committee can't agree on something, and people are asking, what should we do? Usually my question is, what are you afraid of? What fear is driving you to do something, either too quickly or getting ahead of the committee or getting ahead of the Lord? Where in your life are you taking matters into your own hands because you are so filled with fear that you fail to listen to the first admonishment where you've taken your eyes off of God and placed them rather on the fears? Jesus says, do not be afraid. Now in another section, in verse 34, which is past the lesson that Bob said today, Jesus gives a third encouragement when he says, guard your hearts. Guard your hearts. Your heart would want to fall for everything from to the left to the right. You may want to give your heart something. You may want to claim allegiance to something. You may want to follow a person. You may want to claim allegiance to a particular political party or political cause or some kind of agenda in your life. And Jesus says, guard your hearts. It goes back to the other two. Be not afraid. And beware that you are not led astray. And couched within this conversation about all of these things that are happening around them, or all the things that are going to happen, Jesus says very specifically in verse 13, at least in my translation, that the one thing we should do is take every opportunity to witness. It's verse 13. Bob, what translation were you reading? The NIV? NIV is a little bit differently. But in some translations it says, take every opportunity to witness. Take every opportunity to testify. You see, it's at that moment when you take your eyes off of God, or you find yourself floundering in fear, or you fail to guard your heart, that's when you forget that we are called to be a Great Commission people who must bear witness to the sovereign Lord who is in charge, regardless of what happens around us. Regardless of the earthquakes that happen, or the famines, or the pestilence, regardless of whether or not nations fall or nations make war with other nations, if we keep our eyes focused on God, if we're not afraid, if we guard our hearts, we will continue to see every opportunity as a way to bear witness to the Lord. See, what happens is when you take your eyes off the ball, when you flounder in fear, when you fail to guard your hearts, then it becomes about you. And you forget that you are not your own, but that God calls you to be his vessel, to find every opportunity, to take every opportunity to give testimony to the Lord Jesus Christ and what the Lord is doing in your life, to the fact that God is sovereign even though things happen around us. Jesus said himself, see all this, it's going to fall apart. It's going to fail. Your best laid plans may fail. Seasons come and go and things phase out. You know as well as I do that things wither and fade, but the word of the Lord stands forever. And Jesus acknowledges this by saying that though things fall apart, though things fail, though we find ourselves in all kinds of disoriented places, of places in which we feel misplaced or far from home, find every opportunity to bear witness to the good news. Find every opportunity to testify. And don't even worry about what you're going to say. You shouldn't even fear what you're going to say, because the Holy Spirit will fall upon you and fill you and give you the exact words that you need in the right time that you need them. Now, I think the Bible is interesting because it gives us a story in which these things, right after Jesus teaches the disciples this, things start to unravel. In Luke 22, Judas, this is around maybe Wednesday or Thursday of Jesus' last week, the week of Passover, Judas takes note, as the treasurer, that Jesus may not be the guy that he thought he was. So you have to understand that Judas, in the company of disciples, was Jesus' treasurer. And in Judas's mind, you're saving money when you go to Israel in order to spend money on buying weapons and horses in order to raise an army. And so far, we're halfway through Passover, and Jesus has not raised an army. Jesus has not gone, he didn't even come in on a horse, he came in on a donkey. Jesus is still teaching in parables. He's still talking about going to the cross and having to give up your life in order to save it. And Judas tries to figure out which way the wind is blowing, and he feels that he's back to losing horse. And I have a feeling that if many of us were in his shoes, we probably feel the same way. We want to back winners, not losers. And in this case, Jesus is still speaking in parables. The authorities are trying every which way to trap him and arrest him. And then he told the disciples just yesterday, you're going to be arrested too. I mean, who wants to be a part of that agenda? And so Judas, figuring out that this Messiah isn't going to raise an army and overthrow the Romans like he had hoped, goes to the authorities and finds a way to cash out. It says that Satan enters him. They make a deal with Judas, the authorities do. And if you read very closely in Luke 22, I'll give it to you, verse 6, Luke 22, verse 6, it says that Judas tries to find every opportunity to betray Jesus. Now, this is important in the English translation because the language is the same as Luke 21, verse 13, and Luke 22, verse 6. Jesus says, take every opportunity to testify. In Luke 22, when Judas makes a deal to cash out, in order to make some money, at least he can make his investment back, it says he's trying to find now every opportunity to betray Jesus. See, Judas took his eyes off of the kingdom of God, off of what Jesus had taught him for the last 3 years. Judas was filled with fear and did not want to be counted among those who were going to be dragged before the courts and in the synagogues. Certainly wasn't going to go to the cross. And Judas failed to guard his heart. Rather than being filled with the Spirit to find an opportunity, Satan took advantage, found an open door, moved upon Judas's heart, and led him to find the opportunities that would eventually betray Jesus. Now, you may think, I'm not going to betray Jesus, I'm no Judas, right? But think of all of the situations in your life, and I don't know what situations you may find yourself in. It may be something, a financial hurdle. It may be a conflict with your spouse. It may be some hurdle you're facing in raising your children. You're at an impasse with your kids and you feel like you're floundering. It may be that you're watching the news too much and you're floundering in fear because you see everything falling apart around you. I don't know what your situation is, but every situation calls for us to take into account our perspective. Are we taking every opportunity to testify to the Lord? Or are we using opportunities to make excuses to run away from the Lord? Are we staying on site and looking to God in the kingdom work that God is doing, and so that we do it with boldness by guarding our hearts? Or are we allowing the storms of the world to upset us in such a way that rather than seeing opportunities to testify, we take opportunities to take matters into our own hands, or to do what we think is best, or to push our particular plan, or to try to muddle through life with our own understanding? Jesus gives us a decision. Are we going to take every opportunity? And how will we take every opportunity? See, I think if Jesus was in our midst, he would look around us and he would walk through our community and says, look at these beautiful things. You know, things fall apart, things fail, things wither and waste away. But I think Jesus would tell us the same. Do you see the opportunities around you? And are you taking every opportunity to witness and to share the love of Christ and to tell the things of God, of what God is doing in our midst? Or are you so fearful that you're just looking for an opportunity to just cut and run, sell out, and to give in to whatever you think is